Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sandy Treadway, and I'm the state librarian for Virginia. And on behalf of all of us at the Library of Virginia, it is such a delight to welcome you to tonight's exciting program featuring the three finalists for this year's Library of Virginia Literary Award for Poetry. We have three amazing women here with us tonight. We have Sandra Beasley, Rita Dove, and Tina Parker. And leading them in conversation and moderating tonight's event is another wonderful poet, Lauren Elaine. Before we dive into the program, though, I would like to just take a moment to say thank you to all the sponsors who make tonight's program and our entire Literary Awards event possible, and especially to our two presenting sponsors this year, Amazon and Dominion Energy. We are so grateful for their support and excited that it makes evenings such as tonight's possible. Now to introduce our moderator. Lauren Elaine is the author of two collections of poetry, one called Difficult Fruit, published in 2014, and another Honeyfish, published in 2019. And she's also the author of Furious Flower, Seeding the Future of African American Poetry. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Tin House, Mrs. Muse, and many other publications. Among her most recent honors include nominations for the 2020 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Poetry, the 2020 Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, and the 2020 Library of Virginia Literary Award for Poetry. Born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, Elaine currently resides in Harrisonburg, Virginia, where she is professor of English at James Madison University and the executive director of the wonderful Furious Flower Poetry Center that's housed there. I know you will enjoy meeting her and the finalists that she will now introduce you to. So, Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandy, for that wonderful introduction and welcome. And hello again to our audiences who are joining us tonight. A special welcome to our poetry finalists whose outstanding books we are celebrating tonight. Sandra Beasley's collection, Made to Explode, Rita Dove's Playlist for the Apocalypse, and Tina Parker's Lock Her Up. I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to host what I know will be a phenomenal reading and conversation. And I want to encourage you out there, our listeners tonight, if you hear something you like, feel free to utilize the comment section. I would like the chat to be hopping. But also, if you have questions, there will be a Q&A at the end that I'll be moderating. I have a ton of questions, but I promise I will make space and prioritize yours. So please, if you have questions throughout the reading, go ahead and put them in the chat. They will be collected, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible before we have to say good night. And so, without further ado, again, we're in the cybersphere, so I want us to imagine the applause that's coming as we introduce each of these poets. I would love to introduce our first finalist. Presenting, it's Sandra Beasley. Sandra Beasley is the author of 4 poetry collections: Made to Explode, Count the Waves, I Was the Jukebox, which won the 2009 Barnard Women's Poets Prize, and Theories of Falling, as well as a memoir, a disability memoir and cultural history of food allergies, Don't Kill the Birthday Girl, Tales from an Allergic Life. She served as editor for Vinegar and Char, Verse from the Southern Foodways Alliance, and honors for her work include the 2019 Munster Literature Center's John Montague International Poetry Fellowship, a 2015 NEA Fellowship, and 5, count them, DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities Fellowships. She grew up in Vienna, Virginia, and earned degrees at the University of Virginia and American University. She lives in Washington, D.C., and is going to grace us with some poems. Take it away, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am really honored to visit with you all virtually, and in particular to be in the company of these amazing finalists. I'm going to read a few poems from Made to Explode. I'm going to start with the first poem in the book. I know it's old school, but I'm going to follow my own cue. This poem is called Heirloom. And as Lauren mentioned, I had previously been working with the Southern Foodways Alliance on an anthology of poems of Southern food traditions. As I came away from that project, I still found myself wanting to write about some foods of my upbringing, some of which were cheaper, frankly. Were not like farm to table, they were freezer to table. And all I'll say is that to write about food, I soon realized was continuing a deeper journey into writing about history, into writing about family, into writing about class. One last thing, all of the following Ore-Ida tater tot facts are true. Heirloom. Lo, 12 children born to a woman named Thankful in Nampa by the border between Oregon and Idaho, or as it will be remembered, Ore-Ida. Lo, 2 of her sons drive to Miami not knowing if their plan will work. Lo, what were once waste scraps fed to the cows, now repackaged, the fry shavings sliced, spiced, and oiled. Lo, a chef at the Fontainebleau takes the bribe. Lo, tater tots are dished onto the tables of the 1954 National Potato Convention and soon enshrined in the freezers of America. 3 decades later, the golden age of my childhood is a foil-lined tray plattered with Ore-Ida product, maybe salt, maybe nothing but hot anticipation of my fingertips. Lo, my mother is a great cook, and lo, my grandmother is a terrible one, but on tin-foil planes, they are equal. I need you to understand why my father will never enjoy an heirloom tomato, glistening, layered in basil. Put away your Brandywines, your Cherokee purples, your green zebras. Lo, as with spinach, as with olives, he tastes only the claustrophobia his mother unleashed from cans. To feed 4 children on a budget. We talk little of this. Lo, what is cooked to mush. Lo, what is peppered to ash. Lo, the flavor rendered as morning chore, that this too is a of love. There's a whole series of poems in this book about monuments and memorials, and that was one way of bridging my experience. At this point, I've lived half my life in Virginia, half in DC. As was mentioned, I actually not only went to University of Virginia, but before that, Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Tech. I've had a lot of Thomas Jefferson in my lifetime, and the title of this next piece is called Jefferson Midnight. The speaker is at the memorial. If you know the Jefferson Memorial, you know it is in fact accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The speaker stands at midnight thinking of Jefferson's larger history, what gets celebrated and what gets left out. Jefferson Midnight. In another version of this story, he's a naturalist who dabbled in politics. He reinvented the plow. He joined the American Philosophical Society's Bone Committee, and while trying to prove the great Western lion, gave us our first giant sloth. He shipped a rotting moose to France to demonstrate the greatness of our mammals. He is a father of paleontology who didn't believe extinction was part of God's plan. He asked Lewis and Clark, should they encounter the mammoth, to capture one. For months, his seawall has been sinking, the Potomac's mudflats sucking at support timbers. In 1918 and for 6 summers after, the tidal basin was chlorinated, so this bank could become a beach, whites only. Spiders who are drawn to rising heat populate the ceiling of Jefferson's Memorial. Once the sun sets, the temperature drops, they lose their grip and fall. Bodies bounce off my shoulders, bodies land in my hair. Guards call this the spider rain. I'll finish by reading a poem that represents a different aspect of the book. I do affiliate as a disabled writer, as a disabled woman, and I think we're in a moment where we all as a culture are reckoning with disability, especially in a time when so many of us are realizing the consequences of the pandemic. This is in a sense, it's a critique of the language that is so often offered around accommodation, which is so often hollow language. Customer service is, we take pride in serving the, we're accustomed to servicing the, please take the attached, please answer these 6, please answer these 8. This will only be a quick, if microphones don't reach, then if ramps are required, then if you need audio, then if you need visual, then we request 1 week's, we request 1 month's. All reasonable requests will. A flock of surveys is a surveillance. A stampede of stairs is an architecture. An expectation of elevators is a favor. An oh crap of crips is a caucus. But I have an aunt who is, I had a friend who was, we practice best, we follow the, you have to see our, you have to stand up for, your help is so, your answers will be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Oh my gosh, I have so many questions, but I want to start with one that, is a little crafty and you can tell a little bit. I think the work is so lush with detail. There's so many images, but just rich, delicious, beautiful details compounding into these poems. And I feel like, God is in the details and so isn't the devil. So talk to me about that composition. What's your secret sauce for bringing all of those images together?
Oh
And at
man.
the same time, I know, but I just want to know.
Part of what you're sweetly alluding to is that I'm a perfectionist, but also a procrastinator. So research is like my best friend and my worst enemy, meaning I get so many details from the world around me, whether it's history or tater tot trivia or science, and part of the trick is gathering up all those things, but then not letting my need to show my work kind of choke the poem on the page, letting the really essential things come in and flavor it. The only other thing I can say about imagery is that, I'm the daughter of a visual artist. I'm married to a painter. I feel so fortunate to always have people around me who think richly in visuals when I am so verbal. So part of me is always thinking towards their audience, wanting to create a world that they can enjoy stepping into. Yeah.
Thank you. I also had another kind of crafty question, which is there's a section of this book that's prose poems. And I'm curious about your relationship. What attracts you to the prose poem? How does it feel? Or does it feel different than writing in lineated verse? Like, what's your relationship to that particular form?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I write creative nonfiction too. And so it's funny, I can have sometimes moments where I've got a shapely paragraph or two, and it's like, well, is this becoming a prose poem or is this becoming a flash nonfiction? And what I find is that I try to really think through what my motivation in writing the piece is. I think that prose poems as a mode, if you're going to talk about like forms, the way that sonnets are so often speaking of love, I think the goal of a prose poem is to set an expectation and then ultimately to subvert that expectation. that to me is the move in a prose poem. It's not a volta per se, but it is that flip. And I think there's so many great generational examples. I mean, Carolyn Forché's Colonel, which for many of us ends up being the first prose poem we read in American schools. So, you know, I think that that seemed perfect for me to the topic of monuments and memorials. You set the expectation and then you subvert it. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll close with this one question. What was the hardest or most surprising or most joyful poem to write in this collection?
There's, you know, there are some really hard poems to write in this collection. And that said, I'm not looking for a gold star for that. They were necessary poems. And so what I'd rather talk about in a sense is there's a poem called Card Table. I feel like since I dissed my grandmother's cooking and heirloom, I need to acknowledge Card Table, which is, it's actually about the other grandmother, but they were both nurturing in their way. And it was really written in a moment that came out of the mourning of realizing my grandmother's passing. And it's also the only time I've ever read a poem graveside, ultimately. It's talking about a very benign, modest gift, a card table, and initially kind of not understanding how significant such a staple of building a household could be, carrying it from place to place. It's weird for me to say I love that poem, but I love that poem because I love what
You need a table. I love that poem.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And I will bring up our next finalist, Rita Dove. Rita Dove won the Pulitzer Prize for her third poetry book, Thomas and Beulah, in 1987 and served as U.S. Poet Laureate from 1993 to 1995. Playlists for the Apocalypse is her latest volume of poetry. She's also published a novel, a short story collection, essays, and a play. She received the National Humanities Medal from President Clinton and the National Medal of Arts from President Obama, the only poet to ever receive both. Her most recent honors include the 2019 Wallace Stevens Award, the 2021 Gold Medal for Poetry from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the third woman and first African-American poet in the medal's 110-year history, and the 2022 Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize for Lifetime Achievement. She teaches at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, where she's a Henry Hoynes Professor of Creative Writing. Rita.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Sandra, for that amazing reading. I've been waiting to hear those poems, and I'm so glad I could. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. I'm excited to have this chance to talk with both Sandra and with Tina, whose book is fantastic as well. And I thought what I would do, I will be reading from playlists from the Apocalypse, a few of the shorter poems. And I'll start with a poem that is dedicated to my mother. My mother passed away a couple of years ago, but I found among her things this photograph of her in 1946 with a couple of her girlfriends. Now, this is right after World War II, and they are looking fine. Girls on the Town, 1946, for Elvira H.D., 1924 to 2019. You love a red lip. The dimples are extra currency, though you take care to keep powder from caking those charmed valleys. Mascara? Check. Blush? Oh yes. And a hat is never wrong, except evenings in the clubs. There a deeper ruby and smoldering eye will do the trick with tiny embellishments, a ribbon or jewel, perhaps a flower, if one is feeling especially flirty or sad. Until Rosie fired up her rivets, flaunting was a male prerogative. Now you and your girls have lacquered up and pinned on your tail feathers, fit to sally forth and trample each plopped heart quivering at the tip of your patent leather Mary Janes. This is the only power you hold on to, ripped from the dreams none of you believe are worth the telling. Instead of mumbling, why not decorate? Even in dim light, how you glister, slow-eyed, your smile in flames. My daughter, who is now grown, I can't believe it, and a professor in her own right, when she was 5 years old, used to walk around the house saying nobody loved her but the spring cricket. And so I decided to let the spring cricket have a chance to talk. There's a whole section of spring cricket poems, and I suspect there are going to be more later on. The spring cricket considers the question of negritude. I was playing my tunes all by myself. I didn't know anybody else who could play along. Sure, the tunes were sad, but sweet too, and wouldn't come until the day gave out. You know that way the sky has of dangling her last bright wisps? That's when the ache would bloom inside until I couldn't wait. I knelt down to scrape myself clean and didn't care who heard. Then came the shouts and whistles, the roundup into jars, a clamber of legs. Now there were others, tumbled, clouded. I didn't know their names. We were a musical lantern. Children slept to our rasping sighs. And if now and then one of us shook free and sang as he climbed to the brim, he would always fall again, which made them laugh and clap their hands. At least then we knew what pleased them and where the brink was. This poem is part of a sequence of poems dealing with historical events from the last 50 years of United States history. And it was inspired by working with a composer, Richard Daniel Poor, on a song cycle. So this is one of the quote songs. It takes place in 1968, which, if you remember, was a year when we really thought the world was ending, all of the assassinations and all of the uproar. You're tired, you're poor. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken? No more princes for the poor. Loss whittling you thin. Grief is the constant now. Hope the last word spoken. In a dance of two elegies, which circles the drain? A token year with its daisies and carbines is where we begin. Who comforts you now? That the wheel has broken is Mechanics 101. To keep dreaming when the joke's on you? Well, crazier legends have been written. Grief is the constant now. Hope, the last word spoken on a motel balcony, shouted in a hotel kitchen. No kin can make this journey for you. The root's locked in. Who comforts you now that the wheel has broken the bodies of its makers? Beyond the smoke and ashes, what you hear rising is nothing but the wind. Who comforts you? Now that the wheel has broken, grief is the constant. Hope, the last word spoken. This is a persona poem spoken by one of the four African-American girls who were in the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, when the Ku Klux Klan bombed that church in 1963. Youth Sunday. This morning's already good. Summer's cooling, Addie chattering like a magpie. But today we are leading the congregation. Ain't that a fine thing? All in white like angels. They'll be sighing when we appear at the pulpit and proclaim, "Open your hymnals." Addie, what's the page number again? Never mind, it'll be posted. I think, I hope. Hold still, Carol, or else this sash will never sit right. There. Now you do mine. Almost 11. I'm ready. My, don't we look? What's that word the Reverend used in last Sunday's sermon? Oh, I got it. Ethereal. And I'll end with a poem that takes place here in my hometown, Charlottesville, Virginia. But the incident happened a little before the infamous statues came down. Pedestrian crossing, Charlottesville. A gaggle of girls giggle over the bricks leading off Court Square. We break dutifully and wait. But there's at least 20 of these knob-kneed creatures, blonde and curly, still at an age that thinks impudence is cute. Look how they dart and dither, changing flanks as they lurch along, golden gobbets of infuriating foolishness or pure joy, depending on one's disposition. At the moment, mine's sour. This is taking far too long. Don't they have minders? Just behind my shoulder in the city park, the Southern General still stands, stonewalling us all. When I was their age, I judged Goldilocks nothing more than a pint-sized criminal who flounced into others' lives, then assumed their clemency. Unfair, I know, my aggression, to lump them into a gaggle, silly geese, when all they're guilty of is being young. So far.
Whew. Thank you so much for that wonderful reading, Rita. I'm going to start with this a big question to sort of, you've had such a long and dazzling career in poetry. I'm curious, what's still exciting and surprising in writing a poem for you now?
Oh, Lord. I mean, every poem that I enter into, it has its measure of excitement and despair still. And if it doesn't have that, then something's wrong, then it's not going to happen. But I still am kind of amazed that when I'm working on a poem, there is that period where I think I know nothing, and I'm still trying to work it out. And that if the poem finally comes together, if I'm lucky enough, there's magic. It happens and it starts to roll. And I don't know how that happens still. And I hope that I never know how that happens still.
Gosh, I know. I always tell my students, poetry is that marriage of mechanics and mystery, right? And so there's that mystery that we hope to encounter every time. But now I have a mechanics question for you, because you have a sonnet to sonnets in this collection. Okay, hollering at my favorite form, odes and blues. And I just want to know, what's your relationship to form? How do you engage it? What's exciting or good? Why do you still write sonnets?
I still write sonnets. I explode villanelles as I did in the Your Tired Report. And as Sandra said about prose poems, I loved her definition of them, and how they subvert. I have a prose poem which is a subversion of what prose is, or what a prose poem is altogether. For me, working in a form is a way of, I can surprise myself, because I will become distracted by the strictures of the form at some points, and that distraction will lead to kind of opening up something that I've been hiding, because we all hide we hide stuff from ourselves all the time, or else we wouldn't be able to get through a day. But at the same time, sometimes the form will not distract, but will in fact guide. I never really go to a form and say, I'm now going to write a sonnet. It happens. I think with a sonnet, I tell my students all the time that you really can't write a sonnet until you've written at least 100 or so. You have to be able to breathe a sonnet, and you know instinctively where 14 lines is. It's one of my favorite forms too, even though I wrote a sonnet against the sonnet.
The jagged edge. Another formal question about, you read a couple persona poems tonight, and that's just one of, again, a favorite modality of poetry. And I'm interested because you have so many different personas in this collection. I'm curious about that process of entering another perspective and character so fully as to produce the beautiful poems you have, and then how is it to transition into another one, right? Like, do you find that they linger? Do they, I'm just curious about that in and out, that moving into that perspective and back out, and then into another one and back out.
Yes, the persona poem. I really do enjoy writing persona poems, but I always find that the persona poems are probably my most personal poems. That the mask of the persona, it also gets at something very essential, in my soul, and I hope that with a successful persona poem, it also reaches out into something essential in the reader's, soul. Now, moving in and out, I don't know. I don't think that I don't have a real problem with that. I've written plays, and with plays, you're moving in and out all the time, and so it's all these voices in my head. I have a whole congregation in there, going, and that feels great. What I find the most difficult sometimes is not writing in person, and to write a very personal poem from the I. And in fact, the last section of this whole book is very personal. It deals with my dealing with multiple sclerosis. But to write the I poem is sometimes very difficult. I feel very naked.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll close with a question about that is still kind of forming, but I feel like when I read this collection, one of the things I was struck by was the geographies of the poems. Like, I feel like they go to some like literal places that you move to and through. And I'm just curious about place as part of your poetics, and what's the relationship of place to your writing?
Wow. Well, I was talking to my husband, Fred, the other day. We just got back from Berlin, and I said to him, I think we are living a permanently diasporic life. That we're living in a diaspora. We're always traveling, and for me, home is, interestingly enough, on the page. It is the place, the absolute place that I continue to come back to is the page, whether I'm writing or whether I'm reading. Both of those. I grew up with my head in a book, and that's where I discovered the world. So that's my feeling about place. But in terms of writing from different perspectives, and again, I'm going to bow to Sandra, who was talking about that combination of procrastination and perfectionism. I love doing research too. And if I'm going to write about something that's taking place in different places, I'm going to research the heck out of it until I feel that I'm walking their shoes. And that is a feeling, also a way of slipping into that character. So yeah, place is it's a movable feast.
Thank you so much for that reading and for those answers. I am going to bring up our final finalist of the night, Tina Parker. Tina Parker grew up in the mountains of Southwest Virginia and now lives in Berea, Kentucky. She's the author of 3 books of poetry, most recently Lock Her Up, published by Accents Publishing in 2021. Her work springs from historical research into the lives of women labeled as other, whether that be witch, insane, or hysterical. And I would welcome Tina.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren, for that introduction. And Sandra and Rita, beautiful words, beautifully read. I'll start with a poem. It's called Slow Heat. Slow heat. High strung, they called her, unsettled. We come home, she clawed her a notch, jerked the planks right out, said the witch needed her. Ginseng, they said, ease the hippo, help her sleep, start slow, build the dose. None of us knew what it would take to smother her. Patient record. Maddie M. Roberts, age 19 years. Single, just from school. Her father has considerable property, and his daughter is here as a pay patient. She's constantly moving and throwing herself about. No restraint has been imposed. The day they came for me. The day they came for me, I sliced open the sun. I walked the tightrope and touched the moon. I drank stars that day. I danced with a tree and climbed into thunder. The day they came for me, I cartwheeled into the sea and sang Open the Snow. I'll pause for a minute to say thank you to the Library of Virginia. This is a prom night, very special evening of sorts for Lock Her Up, because it was born out of my own, growing up with stories of Appalachian folklore, hauntings, and then going to the Library of Virginia to research patient records. So pre-pandemic, putting on those amazing white gloves, looking through the archives, there's nothing like it. So this work is very much courtesy the Library of Virginia. So dear viewers, I hope you will donate as you are able. I'll read a few more poems. This one is called Testimony. Testimony. They told the judge I sat before an open fire, fell right into it, but wasn't a hair on my head singed. They recalled my vision, a prophetess wearing clothes the color of rotten grasses. Grounding sage to a fine powder, they said I put it in their tea, told them to drink and be sanctified. They said their throats burned, claimed they could not speak. The minister said he'd seen many slain in the spirit, but not me. Said I was different, that he felt directed to sign as witness. Release. The minister says I'm alive through grace, says they may never know what rendered me silent. He tells them to pray. The Spirit gives several messages in other tongues. Praise the Lord, they shout. Praise the Lord. The women place a Bible under my pillow, and I dream my voice returns. I point to the minister, but no one listens. And to close, a poem called Hair. Once sun-touched from the tops of trees, now it comes out by handfuls. I crochet into baby blankets. At night, I gather strands in the corner. See, I am here. Please tell them I was here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina, for sharing that. I would love it if you could, you started to answer my first question about how you happened upon this fascinating topic. And if you could, you mentioned folklore. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yes, absolutely. So the broader story comes from before this book, I was writing poems about motherhood. And from there, I started thinking about the history of women's health in our country and the history of mental illness, which is its own two rabbit holes. And then I started thinking about the asylum near where I grew up was a very real part of my childhood. In Marion, Virginia, it was as in, you better, shape up, stay in line, or we're going to send you up the hill. So then that all swirled together with thinking about the lives of women who were locked up by the men in their community into an asylum, again, not that long ago in our history. And then thinking about what their lives were like back home. So that brought in the Appalachian folklore, Appalachian mountain religion, and my very own, as Rita said, the persona poems I write are always autobiographical. That's kind of how I talk about it, or infused with a part of me. And so all of that swirled together. So thank you for that question.
Oh, thank you for that answer. I'm really interested. Everybody has mentioned research tonight, so I should have saved this for a group question. But in yours, again, the research was so visible, but at the same time, at the end of the book, you have the disclaimer: none of these are real. Any, I feel like any, the Law and Order, like anything here is accidental in its relationship to an actual person. And so I'm curious about how you manage that tension of dealing with real records and real information, right, gleaned from the Library of Virginia, right, authoritative records, and at the same time having to release all of that to create, imagine, right, into these stories. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's always a very fun dance that we're doing, but I do think, I always end up saying these characters end up becoming composites, and they're based on types that came out of research from those primary sources. And then they're just infused with everything from my own, bringing up the way I came up, a girl in the South, in the Southern Baptist Church. They cannot escape the political backdrop of the time when I was writing them. And a time that is even, more extreme now, hence the title. So that's kind of how I answer that. And I loved getting to be like a fiction writer and pretend and get to put that disclaimer on there.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. Thank you. I was curious too, like, again, what, and maybe again you sort of answered this, but again, I feel like the research and the records are there. Are there other like tangible things that inspired you in the writing? I feel like there are things. I feel the presence of things. I want to know what those things are.
Okay. Yes, that's a great question. I say always, like, a lot of times when I'm researching, it doesn't look like I am. So I might be binging true crime. That's in there. And also, my Charlotte Perkins Gilman, definitely in there. Just again, reading about all the history of women's health, the history of mental health in our country. Secondary sources I found just by, Googling and finding like maybe a student's thesis about kind of compiling the reasons women were institutionalized. So many things.
Yeah, I love to hear that binging true crime and television. It can be inspirational for poems. It's work too, y'all. Netflix is work too.
That's right.
Thank you so much. I would love to bring all of the finalists on to open up our conversation. And thank you, Tina, for that wonderful reading and poems and the answers. And I just let's all chat. So welcome back to Rita and Sandra. And my first question is for the whole group. I'm going to start with you, Sandra. Is these titles, y'all, made to explode. Playlist for the apocalypse. Lock her up. Boom, boom, boom. I would love for you to tell us the story inside of these titles.
Well, I'm laughing because I actually had a moment on the phone with Rita saying, I need to change my book title. What do I do? So I really, it's a little inside baseball for me. But no, I Made to Explode in the book is actually it's a phrase that is extrapolated from yarn bombing, which is like a folk art graffiti form. It's a non-invasive graffiti form because you don't damage the object. You just overnight mysteriously knit something around it. And I loved that it was both, and I think the cover art does a really good job of doing this. the explosion can be interpreted as violence or it can be interpreted as celebration. And I think that's kind of perfect for a book that is in some ways interrogating patriotism. Not all the poems, but a number of the poems. And so, and in the case of the yarn bombing, that was actually around the Einstein Memorial, which is one of the great unsung memorials of the downtown DC area. So yeah, but I mean, I have to give credit to another poet, Maureen Thorson, because a previous title just wasn't quite working. And she heroically went through my book over a weekend, pulled 10 phrases out. And when I got to that one, I was like, oh, that's it. So this is a good lesson to everyone. Have trust, not only trusted readers, but trusted title harvesters.
I do that with my best friend, believe it or not. She did the same thing for me with my first book. She was just like, okay, we're going in. So that's wonderful. The communal title.
Yeah.
Rita.
Oh, well, with me, what happened? It's so crazy because the title came fairly late and everything. The pandemic hit. I was at home. I had to cancel lots of readings. Thank goodness. I mean, I don't mean that, but I do mean that because I meant that I could be interior without interruption and talk to the poems and see if they were going to make a group or not. And so the book began to come together. Now, one of the things that I always do when I give a reading is I do make a list of the poems I'm going to read. And I've called them playlists since, I don't know, years and years and years, my own little shorthand. And so I thought, well, this is kind of like a playlist of playlists. So but I wasn't quite sure how to, whether I could get away with this type, basically. And so I showed it to people and asked and stuff like that. What I wanted was that the apocalypse, just as Sandra talked about the explosion in her cover, that apocalypse can be both a disaster, everything, or it is a revelation. And one of the definitions of an apocalypse is a revelation of something about yourself you don't know, which can be interpreted as a disaster. So I wanted to work both ways. And it is a line from one of the poems, but the poem came after I had the title. And the name of the poem is Shakespeare Doesn't Care. So, but yeah, so.
Thank you. Lock her up, Tina.
Yes, well, I'm thinking on this, and I very much had in my mind the three, like I had found three themes of why women were locked up in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and I wasn't thinking of it exactly like that, but I was thinking, okay, there's this single younger woman who just is real loud and doesn't want to fit the mold. There's this like mother who's grieving, has lost a child, and then she needs to be locked up. There's a widow and her sons just, don't want to fool with her. So she needs to be locked up. And then in the backdrop, there's like a lot of there's found, phrases and entire found poems in this collection. And then there's people holding up signs at protests that say, lock her up. So it was pretty much just like, all right. And where, I'm writing about history in the past, but am I really? I think that's
Absolutely. I mean, I felt like there's such a present resonance in a book that was about the in the past. I want to ask about your poetic North Stars. And see how I know in the sky there's one North Star, but I added the S because I'm a nice person. So what is one poet, two poet, three poets max? I'm giving you a limit that you return to again and again that feeds your writing, your practice, that guides you through your poetic journey.
I like the use of the North Stars, that and it keeps changing for me, Lauren. I'm not trying to equivocate, but I do think that, well, Shakespeare does. Shakespeare is always there. Often the plays more than the poems, but the plays. and then it changes. Kavafi sometimes really keeps coming back to me, and I don't know why. I share a birthday with Goethe, so he's my bro over there. I go there. I'm not sure that his poems really speak to me, but I feel like he accompanies me. And Muriel Rukeyser lately.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. And if it helps, maybe even the ones just for this book. But I'm just trying to help y'all out because that's a big question. Who's got me?
I mean, the thing that immediately comes, I mean, the first poetry collection I ever bought with my own money that I can recall was Langston Hughes' Panther and Balash, which I was amazed was in an airport. I was so amazed that a singular collection. It wasn't a big thick volume, and it wasn't an anthology. And that just, for some reason, that book really sat with me in terms of its musicality and also its clarity. I really went back to that book for years and years. And also, even though she's a complicated and in some ways problematic figure, Sylvia Plath, if I weren't honest about my UVA years and being inspired by Ariel in some ways, and going through that book again and again. And I think what's great about both those poets is that they had really big lives, even if in Plath's case the life wasn't long, and you can do all kinds of interesting kind of corroborative research into their drafting process or how their poems were anthologized, or in Langston Hughes' case sometimes quote unquote corrected, which in a way that's really offensive to me in terms of the formatting. And I just was just big artistic spirits and parts of larger community. So those are two people who immediately come to mind. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I think it depends on what I'm working on. So for Lock Her Up, I read and listened to Anne Sexton many times, and Adrienne Rich, and I love the experimental form that Rachel Zucker does. I read her work, listen to her podcast when I need to get back, poetry in my mind again. That's a short answer.
Thank you. Speaking of when you want to get poetry back in your mind again, et cetera, or any kind of language, I feel like all of us writers, we need to read what's on your card table or desk or nightstand at the moment. Just if you what's there, and you can tell us if it's something, non-literary too. Don't be shy.
Well, I have to be honest. I'm actually writing a nonfiction book right now. I'm writing another memoir, and so I part of my hesitation is that I tend to immerse in the mode that I'm writing in. But there is one book that comes to mind, one poetry collection. Zaina Hashim-Beck's O is a really amazing collection that's recently out from Penguin. And she and I have kind of moved through spaces over the years, same conferences, being page neighbors in some of the same journals. And it's just, I really treasure those moments of getting to watch someone's work kind of grow and burst out and do new things. So that's a book I'm excited about right now.
Thank you. I like the word page neighbor. I don't think I've heard that one before. It's a great term. Page neighbor. What's on your desk?
Well, I've been traveling, so my desk is full of everything but books. But what is always on my night table, I confess, are crossword puzzles. I will just tell you, I do them incessantly. I think it's that joy of having the words kind of, joined together, but not having to make sense of the whole, which is something that, of course, writing, we do all the time. We try to do. I just finished, it's been a while and I should have read it a long time ago, but Carol Phillips' The View of the Empire at Sunset, which is a fictionalized account of Jean Rhys's life. And it was really quite phenomenal. The pacing of it and the language was poetic. he schooled me that. And often when I'm working in one genre, I, unlike Sandra, will read another. So if I've been working on poems lately, so I've been reading a lot of fiction, nonfiction, and crossword puzzles.
Thank you. Wordle in the house. Okay. All word games, actually. Tina, what's on your shelf?
Oh, I love reading like Station 11. That's one of my favorite novels. I've read it twice. I reread The Handmaid's Tale recently, which I meant to say that is definitely another big influence in working on Lock Her Up. And I'm really getting into digging into what I call my creepy mountain religion poems. So I'm kind of like, I'll go back and look at my nonfiction on Appalachian mountain religion.
Wow. Well, and I love just getting titles in the air because, this is a library event. Readers are the people who come to libraries. So, just tell them what's on yours. I'm so interested too, though. And I think everybody's, again, a little bit hinted at it. I feel like we all have library relationships, stories. Mine is personally that I hated taking books back to the library. And so when I was leaving home, I sort of had to schlep the Trinidad GDP of fines worthy books back to the library. And my librarians were so wonderful. They're like, you got a scholarship, you're going away to college. Don't worry about it. I was like, yes, but I loved that I could get it all, but I didn't ever want to give it back. And so I loved my librarians too, though, because they still let me borrow the books. They knew my mom. They're like, we'll get it. But they were just so generous in terms of feeding what they could tell was a hunger, right? And so I'm just curious, you started, Tina, maybe you want to talk some more with the white gloves and the research that being at the library afforded you. What library gems do you have to share?
Oh, so many. I absolutely love this. It's really a part of my summers and my relationship with my mom because she was a first grade teacher. So, she and I spent our summers going back and forth to the public library, and her getting the Harlequin romances and me getting just whatever I was gobbling up at that time. And I think I grew up with a book in my face, and that's how I knew the world, as I heard Rita say. And there's something about, I was so happy when the pandemic allowed me to go to the Berea College archives again, because that's just steps away. There's just something about digging into primary sources, and you never know what treasure you're going to find.
Yeah.
Well, I oops. No, go, Sandra. Go.
Well, I just want to say I love the discussion of archives work, but I also want to give a shout out to just Fairfax County Public Libraries, like just the library as social center, the library as beanbags on the floor, and at least back in the day, like a guinea pig cage, and screenings of Black Beauty on the weekends. Like I was absolutely a kid who maxed out my 50 book limit on my Fairfax County Public Library card. But I also just want to mention, like, just as a social hub and a safe space. And, this wasn't my generation, but now, like, as a place for internet and climate control, and like just an amazing shout out to the librarians that have to do that labor of essentially running for what a lot of people have become the only community center that is still accessible to them. So I know that's a little bit of a pivot from your intent, but when I think about libraries, I can't not think of that too.
It's all the ways that they are home for us, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, I have to agree that when I think of libraries, I often think of the branch libraries and the librarians, and that's where I got my start. And my parents, that was one place they allowed me to go. It was about 5 blocks or so that I could walk anytime I wanted to. And the only rule was that I had to return the books before I could get any more out. So, they knew I wouldn't want to hoard them as you did. The train.
The
But
train.
We promise.
love trains anyway. So I would go to the library, and my parents had actually written a note and said, let her take out any book she wants. So I was allowed in the adult section, at 10 or 11. And I think they thought, well, if she can read it and is interested in it, then she's old enough to read it. And it was true. I didn't understand Francois Sagan when I was, 11. I tried, but I didn't understand all that tristesse, But I love libraries, and when I walk into any library, it can be the Library of Congress, or it can be a branch library, there's a calm that just settles over me. I just feel like, I just feel at home. So.
I always feel like when I walk into libraries too, they're very humbling. You walk in and there's so much that you don't know, and like, okay, where do we start? Where do we start? Absolutely, I love it. So again, thank you, Library of Virginia, for all that you make possible and for making tonight possible. I have a question from the Facebook audience. What writing advice did you get early on that proved to be worthless? Give us your worthless advice.
Oh, wow.
I was told I needed to write every day, right? Am I the only one who doesn't, in fact, write every day? If someone here writes every day, you win. You automatically get the prize right now. But I find the advice to write every day kind of, I think it's tough if you're a caregiver. I think it might be ableist. I think it presumes a whole lot of things about how you can organize your life. And I think you nourish your creative self every day. Okay, that I can get on board with, but maybe that doesn't look like writing. Maybe that looks like reading or revising or just taking a breath and storing an image in your bank for later. But you don't have to write every day. That's my take. But someone thought I did, and they told me so.
I have actually been guilty of telling, especially beginning writers, that they should write every day, mainly to try to create the attitude of, I don't write every day, but I think about it every day, and I'm writing in my head every day, or I'm in the attitude of an author at all times. But when someone is starting out, there's also that battle with laziness. There's this feeling of like, oh, I just rather sit back, and have a martini and, do something else. Because there is a part of, writing is hard too. It's hard work. It's wonderful work when it gels, and when it doesn't, it's hell. But it's always, there's a labor involved, and that for beginning writers sometimes hard. But the most worthless advice I ever got was along those lines, Sandra, in that I was kind of told that you get up and you start to write and you work on it, and then you might have to work for several days, but you finish what you started. And I was writing very slowly, and then I realized two things were wrong. One of them was that I don't get up in the morning and write. I'm not a morning person. I write at night, and at midnight I start writing. That's where my body resides, in the most. And also I don't write from beginning to end. I write a snippet here. I work on like 5 poems at once and bounce back and forth, but that's just the way my mind works. Everybody's mind is different, and these prescribed ways are sometimes the most worthless kind of advice we can get.
Rita, I'm just going to interject to say, I was an MFA student at Cornell when you came to visit, and I remember walking you over to where the reading was going to be, and you had said something in the class talk about being a night owl writer, and I felt so free. I was just like, oh God, I don't have to get up and write every day. I'm going to be like Rita Dove. I'm going to write all night instead. Just let me have my midnight writing and stop telling me I got to do it early in the morning. That was That was key. Again, it was one of those pieces of advice, like somehow mourning is more morally acceptable and worthy as a writer. And it didn't work for me. So thank you for saying that out loud. Say it to all the night owls. We need to hear it. Tina, worthless advice.
I think there's just some implied, worthless advice that I've had to spend a lot of my life dismissing. So it's like, it's implied you got to be from a certain place to have a voice or be able to tell your story. You got to look a certain way. You got to speak a certain way. I mean, there were just all of these, expectations based on what was around me and who I saw speaking from a place of authority growing up. So I guess that's kind of just getting at the implied, and all y'all write and tell your story. That's what I always say.
Right.
So there's that feeling people think, oh, you have to be in New York,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have that connection.
Have to have an
Yes.
MFA.
Yes.
Right.
Or even have an office. That was the other one that, you got to have a certain kind of space. I remember reading that in some of the books on writing. I was like, oh, you have this lovely space all around. I was like, no.
Right. What are some of the unexpected things that feed your poetry practice? I mean, I feel like we have such, all of us, because we're people too, in addition to being writers. And so I say feed your practice, but I really mean that feeds you as a human, that allows you to be the writer or the poet. What are your other sources of inspiration and joy? And
For me, there's just something about a mountain view, a vista, same with the river. And so getting back out on the road traveling again post-pandemic has been really good. Even just going on a little ride into on the back roads.
that sounds lovely.
Yes. I love being on the road. I think, being in the car and just, there's something about that. The mind goes free. The soul rests, the mind goes free. Music is for me the thing that, the biggest thing that governs my life. When I say music, I mean not only listening to it, all sorts of music, but participating in it as well. I started out as a cellist. I gave that up in college, went on and I took voice lessons, and to be a student again, to, and to have to learn how to control another instrument is, and also to be part of an orchestra. It's important. All of those things are immensely, I know they influence my writing. I'm not sure how. I'm not going to delineate it because I don't want to, but I know it's there always.
I have to say, I love that answer because I've heard you speak of singing and I've heard you speak of dancing before, but I've never pictured you being anything other than effortless and like 100% skilled at it the first time you ever did it. So I never thought about it as like enjoying the student part of yourself being activated. I just thought of it as like, part of the rest of the repertoire of awesomeness. As I mentioned, I'm surrounded by visual artists. And so for us, museum time is really affirming. It's really nourishing. My husband gets on my case because I'm always projecting narrative on the pieces. And he's like, nope, doesn't have to have a narrative, doesn't even have a horizon line, despite your best efforts to find one. And so I really enjoy the dialogues that come out of visual arts and cooking. It was serendipitous that I was already writing and editing an anthology about food. But frankly, in the last 3 years, there were times where being able to plan around a meal and having the time to prepare it was literally the one way in the day that I was creating affirming space for myself and for my household. So, yeah, I love to cook.
And you have so many wonderful descriptions of food in this book. I mean, even down to the lowly pinto bean. So, thank you.
Or the tater tot.
I'm still dreaming of the event where tater tots are served. Why haven't I had that yet? This is
Yeah, with a little toothpick in each one. Right?
Maybe bacon wrapped. I feel like that would be a really good combo.
Get on it, Library of Virginia. There's still time before I.
Oh my gosh, this has just been so wonderful. I'm just wondering if there's any question you have for each other, or that you wish had been lifted up tonight. We have a little bit of time, and yeah, I'm just going to leave space for that.
I have a question for Tina, and that is, I really was moved and shook by this book, and it felt so absolutely lived in. And then I wondered, and I'd like to know how it felt when you finished it, and how did you move on to the next thing? Because that's sometimes really hard.
I absolutely agree 100%. I really miss it still because it was very much a project book and all consuming. So it's definitely been, there's been sadness, and there's been, now it's out there living its own life. So yeah, I think I still miss it. And yeah, I think that's something we don't talk about so much in the writing world, but it's important, just all of the different stages and emotions we go through with our work. I love that. Thank you.
Rita, since you came to Virginia, I wonder if you'd talk briefly about that. I also think of you as an Ohio poet, which I'm probably just fine with you, but I just wonder if you'll talk briefly about your connection with the place.
Well, yes, I think in my heart of hearts, this blood, I'm a Midwesterner. I mean, I still speak like a Midwesterner, and I can recognize a Midwesterner across a crowded room. But at the same time, what drew me to Virginia was the fact that I felt, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, Sandra, that it's a crossroads for so many of the conflicted emotions and aspirations of this country. I mean, we've got the Confederacy right down the lane, and you've got Jefferson, your Jefferson, who was the epitome of conflicted soul, and it kind of vibrates here. I mean, I felt when I came here, I felt like I was right there at those crossroads, and I still feel that way. This is my home, and when I go back to the Midwest, I feel that I don't belong there any longer. That I have a very different rhythm and a way of looking at things, an ironic stance that I didn't have as much there. The Midwest was hopefulness and, hey, neighbor, how are you? And here you kind of, you take the measure. You give out your Southern, hospitality, but you take the other person's measure, and I feel that's closer to who I am right now. I can't imagine, making my home anywhere else. But I am not. You are right. For someone who grew up in Virginia, I will never be a native. Right? I will never be a Virginian. Okay. But I would like to ask you the same question, Sandra, because what you've done in this book is bring DC to life, which is, talk about, the orphanage.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I was saying that sometimes when I'm traveling and people ask me where I'm from, and they mean in a more immediate way, I'll say DC in the sense of that's where I've lived for 20 years. That's where, having grown up in Northern Virginia, a lot of the cultural values, the political values span Northern Virginia to DC. But would I say that to someone in DC or from DC? No, because they would say, what quadrant were you born in? And I would not have a right answer. So, there's a very sharply delineated understanding, and in my case, honoring of DC, true DC culture. But at the same time, what you were just saying about why you were drawn to Virginia, I've always been fascinated by the fact that DC simultaneously functions as the capital, and with all of the symbolism that goes with that, but also like a city that has its own very specific dynamics and people who stay the biggest misconception is that we're nothing but a revolving door of people coming and going, and that is not true. There are people who stay, and those dynamics and those values, I think, are really I love and can invest in on the page and as a person.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Y'all, I don't want to stop. We are having so much fun. But I want to take a moment to encourage our audience to purchase tonight's works at the virginiashop.org. You can see it on the banner. I want to say congratulations to you, Tina, Rita, and Sandra, for this wonderful honor of being a finalist for the Library of Virginia Award in Poetry. I want to thank you for sharing your poems and your conversation and insights. I don't want to let you go, but I am going to bring Sandy Treadway back on to wrap us up tonight.
Well, like Lauren, I don't want to see you go either. This has been a spellbinding night, and I want to thank all of our finalists tonight, Sandra and Rita and Tina, for sharing not only your work, but sharing yourselves with us. That is a rare gift, and I know our audience is grateful. And Lauren, you did a terrific job bringing out the very best in all of them. So thank you all. And thanks to everyone in our audience who joined us this evening as well. I hope you had a special time, and I hope you'll think about the library and maybe becoming a supporter and a sponsor of some of our work in the future. Be sure to join us next week on Wednesday, October 12th. We have our next Literary Awards panel, which will feature our nonfiction finalists. So John Woodrow Cox and Carolyn Eastman will be with us, and our program will be moderated by Tracy Thomas, who is the host of the popular podcast, The Stacks. I hope you'll also join us in person on Friday night, October 14th at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts for an award, the Mary Lynn Cots Award that we partner with VMFA in giving. It's for the best book in the previous year with visual arts or art as its subject. And this year's winner is Erin Kelly for the book she co-authored with Winfred Rembert called Chasing Me to My Grave, an artist's memoir of the Jim Crow South. And I know that's going to be a very special evening as well. So for more information and a full schedule of our virtual panels and events, please go to our website at lba.virginia.gov and Google Literary Awards, and you'll find it there. Thank you again to everyone, all of our finalists, all of our audience. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.